has joined. So let's start. Hello and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shivangi Singh, who will be moderating today's session, and I'm welcoming you everyone to Expert Hour. And our guest today is Miss Upasana Sarraju, and it is a privilege to introduce today's speaker. She is a Bangalore-based science writer, communication strategist, and public interest storyteller whose work sits at the fascinating intersection of science, culture, philosophy, and society. Upasana is the author of Unruly, the IG Nobel Prize, and The Science That Refuses to Behave, published by Penguin Random House, a compiling exploration of unconventional science and the ideas that challenges the boundary of conventional thinking. Her work reflects a rare ability to make complex scientific ideas accessible, culturally rooted, and deeply engaging for wider audience. Academically trained in science writing through a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University Advanced Academic Program, Upasana combines scientific rigor and narrative clarity. Earlier in her academic journey, she pursued doctoral research in stem cell biology and zebrafish research at the National University of Singapore. Before transitioning towards science communication and public engagement, she also holds a degree in biotechnology from Ramya Institute of Technology. Over the years, she has worked across extraordinary range of scientific and communication ecosystem, from research institution to conversation organization of animal welfare initiative and global science communication programs. Her professional journey includes collaboration with institutions such as Indian Institute of Science, National Center for Biological Sciences, Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology, and the Environment of CGAIR. Currently, Upasana serves as a research fellow with the Archive program at the National Center for Biology Science, where her work engages with science, history, archives, and interdisciplinary storytelling. She was also selected as an Indian Science Book Fellow, an initiative supporting impact science narrative in India. What makes Upasana's work especially distinctive is not just her scientific literacy, but her approach to communication itself. She describes herself as someone who chases small, sturdy facts and odd jokes, while asking difficult questions and translating research without losing nuisance or meaning. Her writing style balances precision with personality, making science feel not distant or intimidating, but human, relatable, and alive. In addition to writing, she has guest spoken in graduate classrooms on science writing, helping young researchers and communicators understand the craft of structure, voice, and evidence-based storytelling. Interestingly, one of her scientific illustrations even found its way into ecological monographs as a published figure, a testament of her interdisciplinary creative instinct. With expertise spanning science communication, stakeholder engagement, research interpretation, and digital storytelling, Upasana brings together the analytical discipline of a researcher and the narrative sensitive of a writer. Today, we are delighted to have her with us to share her insights, experience, and perspective on science communication, storytelling, and evolving relationship between research and society. So please help me warmly welcome Upasana Sarraju. Ma'am, the stage is yours now.
Thank you so much for that elaborate introduction, Shivangi. The only thing people need to remember about me, our wonderful students need to remember, is that my name is Upasana and I like science. That's pretty much it. And today I'm here because I want to talk to all of our friends, all of you, about some paths one can take within science, a career someone can follow within science that is not traditional. Because you may have heard that when you want to study science, you can become a doctor, an engineer, a researcher. or you can learn software coding and get a big fancy job in large multinational corporations. But there are many other paths that a lot of people around the world and in our own country have followed. And some of these people are my friends, some of them are my heroes, some of them I've never had the opportunity to meet, but I've followed their work for a very long time on the internet. And I want to share their stories and their career paths with everyone watching here. And hopefully you can take away that there are many doors within science. It's not just your typical STEM careers, but the world of science is massive, is huge, and there are many, many doors one can walk into to enter this world. So having said that, I have a little presentation I want to share with everyone. And don't worry, it's not long, it's not boring, it's going to be a bit fun. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Shivangi, could you confirm that it's visible?
Yes, it's visible, ma'am.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, Upasana. No, ma'am. Great. So, like I said, I'm interested in sharing everything I've learned about some paths you can take within science that are quite unusual. This may mean that I think someone must be mute. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. This may mean that you can study science and go on to focus more within one science discipline. But it can also mean that you can study a little bit of science and decide, no, my heart and my passion lies in the arts, or my interest lies in example writing or in teaching. But I also like science a little bit. You can combine your multiple interests to create a unique path that's just for you, that can keep you happy, fulfilled, that's challenging you, that pushes you to learn new things about the world and yourself. So let's get started. Hi, my name is Upasana, and I like science, but I also like to write, which is why over the past few years, I've decided to become a science writer. That means I write about a lot of things, but most especially, I write about science. I look at new scientific studies or findings that have come out in India or the world, and I explain them the best I know how in a way that regular Indians and regular readers like myself can understand. Because when science is first created and a scientific study is performed and a result is found at the end of it, that result is often very, very technical. It's very hard for regular folks like you and me to understand, which is where someone like me can come in. I understand enough science to understand what that scientific result is saying, but I also understand enough about language that I can convert that complicated technical scientific result into ordinary words, into ordinary sentences, and still express the same meaning that that scientific study found. That's a very useful skill, which is why I call myself a science writer. Similarly, you have science journalists who study journalism, whose passion is journalism, but also have this wonderful knack and ability to understand and also have an interest in science. So a lot of the science news that you see either online or on Google News or on television, on all the government news channels or the private news channels, is written specifically by someone called a science journalist. Just as you have a sports journalist who's trained in journalism but specializes in sports because they have an interest in sports, or they have a knack for understanding sports better than I do. You have science journalists who know all the foundational principles of journalism, who can do basically all other kinds of journalism also, but their best skills are in reporting about science. Now, it doesn't just mean that a science writer or a science journalist talks about new results that have come out in the world of research. It can also be open Okay. It can also be analysis of what's going on in the country. It can also be commentary about what should happen in law, in policy, in school education related to science. Now, this sounds like a lot of big words, but that's why we're going to go on this conversational journey together. So we can, on our own, identify first, what is my interest? What is my passion? And does that passion have some connection with science? Now, I seem to be frequently getting muted. If someone could take a look at that. I don't know if I'm doing something by mistake. All right, now let's move on. Let's ask ourselves, who counts as a scientist? Is a doctor a scientist? What about an electronics engineer? The person who builds the circuits on the laptops and computers or mobile phones you're watching right now. Are they a scientist? What about somebody who's built the traffic lights on the roads? Or what about someone who's decided what laws should be followed surrounding traffic signals? It's important that someone sits down and thinks very, very carefully about what laws are important, what rules and regulations should be followed by civilians on the road. Because without those rules and regulations, everybody would do whatever they wanted. A lot of the time, you will see on the roads, everybody still does whatever they want. But at least we have a framework. We have somebody telling us this is the safe thing to do, this is the unsafe thing to do. Who decides that? And is the person who decided that a scientist? Would they be considered a scientist? Is your biology teacher or your science teacher a scientist? That's a little game we're going to play, where I will describe somebody and you decide. You tell me in the comments or in the chat box, however you want. You can even argue about this in class with your friends and teachers. You decide if that person counts as a scientist. First, we have a person in a lab coat. That's all the information you have about this hypothetical human being. There is a person in a lab coat. Does this person in a lab coat count as a scientist? Something to think about here is, what sort of people wear lab coats? Sure, people who work in research lab wear lab coats, but don't doctors also wear lab coats? But surgeons are doctors and they don't always wear lab coats. Maybe people working in chemistry could be wearing lab coats. People working in factories could be wearing a different kind of lab coat for safety, but it's a lab coat nonetheless. So are we able to say that a person in a lab coat is a scientist? Let's think about that. The next human being we're going to talk about is a wildlife television host who has a camera, walks around in a forest, and follows birds wherever they go. Maybe it's one particular kind of bird, maybe it's all birds. Is this person who has a television program about wildlife, who focuses on birds, a scientist? Is a wildlife TV show host a scientist? Let's think about that. How are they touching science? How involved are they in science? What is science in the first place? Is everything in nature science? These are things we need to think about and have answers on our own before we're able to decide whether we want to be involved in science at all. Is an investigator trying to find clues in a crime scene a scientist? Now, that entire field is called forensics, and you may have seen it in many, many interesting television shows where once a crime has happened, a robbery or kidnapping, God forbid, somebody is assigned to look for physical clues like fingerprints, like you can see in the picture, or little hairs that might have been left at the crime scene by the criminal. Now, using of footprints and the size of shoe, many factors can become clues if you're a very good investigator. a very good criminal investigator. Is this person a scientist? Somebody who's collecting, for example, fingerprints, and is going to take this information, or in other words, take this fingerprint data back to their little office and work on it with maybe some computers, maybe some machinery, maybe microscopes are involved, lots of chemicals could be involved. Is this person a scientist? This is a familiar picture. That is the one and only Albert Einstein. And it's a fun fact about him that while he was working on his groundbreaking physics theories, general relativity and special relativity, he was not a full-time scientist in a fancy lab. He was working in a patent's office as a patent clerk. Now, is a patent officer or a patent clerk a scientist? Do they become a scientist if they solve big physics problems at the back of worksheets like Albert Einstein? Or what if they're just a patent officer working with regular patents and they're not doing any physics in their time off? Do they count as a scientist then? You must have watched the movie Interstellar, or fans of sci-fi would be able to come up with plenty of examples for this type of person, an animator who is illustrating or animating space objects like black holes, planets, stars, spaceships, even the astronaut suits and the equipment that the actors are shown to wear on screen. The person who is doing the visual effects or the graphics in sci-fi films, surely they must have the understanding of the details of the equipment or of space before they're able to animate it, right? They should educate themselves first to be able to animate a black hole accurately. So does that make an animator who's working, or a graphics designer who's working in a sci-fi film or a regular science film, a scientist? And finally, you know of the Indian Space Research Organization, the pride of our nation, ISRO. This ISRO, this organization, has all kinds of employees because it should. Because building rockets takes a lot more than just engineers. You need somebody to decide, I need this much money to be able to buy all the raw materials I need to make the rocket. So if there's money involved, you need somebody keeping an eye on the finances. You need an employee within the Indian Space Research Organization who is focused on only the accounting in ISRO. It's a space research organization, so it surely has something to do with science. But does an accountant working in ISRO come under the category of scientist? Something to think about. And while you're thinking about all of these things, let me give you a quick answer. Every example I've just mentioned can be legitimate, fulfilling, and very, very socially important science careers. So whether or not somebody is categorized as a scientist, whether or not they can be officially called a scientist, they can still have a very important career path in science, which tells us maybe the world of science is huge, and there can be many, many roles that you or I can occupy in science that is not necessarily a PhD or a researcher or a scientist, which means you're working in science and you're touching science and you love science, you like science, but you may not have a doctoral degree. And that's absolutely fine. It's more than fine, it's exciting. Because let's say somebody grows up with a passion for finances and numbers and maths and accounting and working on computers, but they also have a passion for science or constellations. and maybe they grew up watching stories of Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. Now, this person, when they grow up and they have to decide on a career, they don't have to choose between science, which is something they loved while growing up, and mathematics and numbers and accounting, which they also like, and is a very practical career path to take. They can combine both interests. If you did work in accounting within ISRO, you are working in the world of science while still pursuing an interest and expanding on your primary skill. If your primary skill is working with numbers, but you also love science, couldn't you possibly work assisting researchers handle a lot of big numbers, whether it's in finances or data analysis? Whether it's solving equations as a research assistant or a research associate, or whether it's helping them keep track of their schedule across many, many years. These are many ways in which your two interests, science and numbers, can collide. And that's the whole point of this conversation we're having today, is understanding what am I interested in, how can I collide in a happy way with science using that primary interest. It starts with not by asking what should I focus on in my 11th and 12th or college? What should my major be? What should my main subject be? Or what should my job be when I grow up? It should start by asking, what's a problem out there in the world, in society, in your country or in any other country, for people who are suffering today or for people who have problems they don't even realize they have? What's a problem that's real and out there that you want to solve? It could be the application of knowledge, that is, you could become some kind of an engineer or discover a new disease cure, or it could be focused in the area of knowledge. You want to answer questions, you want to solve knowledge related problems. There are so many mathematical problems today that still don't have solutions. So if that's something you're passionate about, if that's the problem you would like to focus on, then a career path makes itself obvious to you. The career approaches you. You don't have to run behind all these options in a confused way just because you've seen people in your family follow a certain career path, or your cousins or your neighbors or the people you admire online following certain career paths. It's great. Be inspired, but also think about what's a problem that genuinely excites you, a real problem that excites you. That is where we come into this concept of being science adjacent. Adjacent, if you've studied trigonometry, just means near, close to, close by, right? This is the adjacent. This is the opposite. Being science adjacent just means being near science. Let's again go back to the example of the accountant at ISRO. The accountant is still an accountant in the sense that their designation is accountant. They tell all their friends and families that they work in accounting. They've trained in accounting. They may have multiple degrees in accounting, and they may be an expert in accounting. But where is that accounting being utilized? It's in science, in space science to be more specific. That's when we would consider this individual, this accountant working at ISRO, to be science adjacent, near science. Not exactly a scientist. Maybe they are a scientist. It depends on how you define a scientist. But science adjacent is where a lot of very, very interesting careers and passions can find home. And if you've grown up with a particular passion and you would like to see how that passion can contribute to science, think about science adjacent paths or science careers that touch science, that are useful for science, but also combine an interest you have. For the rest of this conversation, we are going to explore what it means to have science adjacent careers and also look at some real life examples of science adjacent careers. I myself would be considered somebody who pursues a science adjacent career because I like writing. That's who I am. That's how I identify. My main passion is writing or communicating, but I use it for science. So I am a science adjacent writer or a science writer. There are many traditional or many expected and many usual ways of pursuing science. And they're all tremendous and they're all wonderful. I'm going to give you some examples of some traditional science paths and then some non-traditional or unusual science paths or science adjacent paths. We're going to look at a few science paths and we're going to look at a few science adjacent paths. This wonderful scientist we're seeing on screen, her name is Jennifer Doudna. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Now, this scientist won a Nobel Prize in chemistry in the year 2020 for studying a beautiful, complicated technology within genetics called CRISPR gene editing. That phrase became quite popular in the news since that year, since this scientist and her colleagues and her team figured out how to edit our genes using this new technology that they call CRISPR. This is a true blue scientist. This person focused on one branch of science, studied very hard, specialized more and more and more and more in that very field, all the way to a PhD, and used her knowledge to discover something new in the field, right? Because CRISPR technology wasn't proven and didn't quite exist until Dr. Jennifer and her team presented it to the world. So science is all about discovery. Science can also be about observation. Here we have another incredible scientist, Dr. Jane Goodall, who studied primates, apes, monkeys, humans, we're all primates. Now, instead of being in a lab and studying genes like Dr. Jennifer in the previous slide, Dr. Jane was out in the forest interacting with animals and studying animals by observing them, writing down her observations in a notebook, analyzing those observations, and then explaining to the rest of the world, hey, did you know that these animals have such complicated friendships between each other? These are the expressions and body language they use when they're happy, sad, angry. And yes, animals have friends and they also fight between each other. Animal societies can have cousins, best friends, families, aunts, uncles, and they all have very interesting and very special relationships and dynamics between each other. And Dr. Jane is an example of somebody who went out into the forest, into nature, and observed, studied what already exists, analyzed it, and made the world a better place by teaching all her knowledge to the rest of us. This is Katherine Johnson. She worked in NASA in a time when it was very unusual for women to be working in engineering. It was unusual for women to do any job out of the house most of the time. It wasn't considered respectable. It was still considered very improper for a woman to be doing this kind of a job. But Katherine Johnson was a mathematician, and she was basically a human computer. She was extremely gifted at mathematics. And with that interest, with that gift, she helped further space science. Now, let's go back to the first question. Would you consider a scientist? Are engineers scientists? Are mathematicians scientists? Her work has been very important to send American human beings out into space, which are called crewed space flights, right? Or manned space flights. Her mathematics help put human beings safely in space and bring them back safely. And finally, we're now looking at a wonderful photograph of a physicist, a Chinese American physicist whose name is Qian-Xiong Wu. Please correct me if that pronunciation has been absolutely butchered by me. She was a Chinese American particle physicist. What does that mean? You know already that everything is matter. Matter is made of atoms. Atoms are made of protons, electrons, and nuclei, which are also made of tinier and tinier and tinier particles. There's all kinds of quarks involved. Those who are interested in studying atoms would already have a lot more knowledge than I do about particle physics. Now, Dr. Wu, her work in physics made it possible for us to understand what is happening inside a nucleus and use that to apply our understanding of nucleus to create energy, to create new kinds of forces that we can use in industry, oftentimes even in war. And war is a very bad thing. But war is an example of an application of knowledge. You may not always be in control of how the knowledge you bring out into the world is applied. Sometimes you could be in control of it. But when a scientist follows their passion, it's usually for good reasons, for the sake of advancing humanity. Somebody else can come along and use your knowledge in a bad way. That's not in your control. But which is why we do our best to not only follow our passion, but also educate others on the ethics of using our knowledge, right? We tell them, I found out this wonderful way of changing cells in your body, but use it only for good. Do not use it for bad reasons, for selfish reasons, for reasons that would be considered unethical or immoral. So if you're doing science and you're also teaching somebody about the morality and ethics of using science, are you a scientist? Are you an ethicist? Are you a moralist? Are you an educator? Or are you a little bit of everything? On screen, we can see examples of Indian or Indian origin traditional scientists and engineers. All of these names would be extremely familiar to you. If not, please look them up online and you'd be amazed at their stories, because many of them came from very normal backgrounds like you and me. Not all of these individuals had a great deal of money growing up, and they didn't always go to the best private schools, and yet they found success in science, because science is one area in which it's your intellect and your hard work and your perseverance that decides whether you become successful or not. Now let's look at some not so traditional paths in science and some real life people who've followed these paths and in many cases have invented these paths. They went out into the world of science and carved out their own path because they said, I want to be what I want to be, and I'm going to do a phenomenal job at it, and thereby I'm going to create a whole new career that hundreds and hundreds of kids after me are going to follow, because I showed them all that it's possible. To start with, something super, super fun, cartooning. Here we're looking at our very own Rohan Chakravarti. And on the top right, we're looking at Ho He Chang. Both of them have a background in science. But what they're best known for, what could be considered their most precious contributions to humanity and to the world, is their art. Not just any kind of art, but their comic strips. They've taken their knowledge of science and they're using it to communicate important ideas, like in this example on the left, plastic pollutions and ocean pollution. And in case of the right, a humorous way of conveying how difficult it is for students of science to communicate with their own families about what's going on. Because a term like thesis or paper has one meaning in science and has a whole other meaning in other fields. So if you work in science and nobody else in your family works in science, it can be really, really difficult and hilarious to try and explain what you do to them. But that's one way of getting really, really good at science communication. Oh, and before we move on, if you're the sort of person who says, I like drawing, nature, I like humor, I like patterns, and I like creative challenges, but I also like teaching through visuals. I also like telling people what right and wrong is, or I like guiding people, then this is a sort of path you might consider. You don't always have to be a cartoonist. You can also do science illustrations. You can help create educational posters that teach other people about hygiene. Like during the pandemic, weren't we all taught about how to wash our hands, to keep distance, and many of them through infographics and visual resources. Somebody did that. They didn't come out of nowhere. An artist did that. An artist who understood the importance of the science behind what they're trying to say, created those visuals for the rest of us to benefit. So if you like drawing, nature, humor, patterns, art, creativity, these are some of the people you could absolutely look up to, and you can follow the path they have laid out, or you can create a path completely unique to you and be very successful at whatever you desire. Now we have, oops, so sorry. Technology. Now we have two more examples of science adjacent careers. On top, we have Dr. K. Vijayaraghavan. He studied genetics. His background was in genetics. But as he got older and learned more and more about how labs run, how universities run, how science actually leaves the lab and goes into society. Oh, somebody's got their audio on. Never mind. Could we please mute this individual? That would be amazing if we were able to do that. Perfect. Now, Dr. K. Vijayaraghavan studied genetics, but as he progressed, he was interested in contributing not just by doing original research, that is the process of discovery, but he was also interested in using his knowledge and his experience to help institutions decide how to run. What sort of rules should institutions have? And he went beyond that and advises even the government about what sort of rules and approaches and philosophies the country should have when it comes to science and technology. So Dr. K. Vijayaraghavan has advised even the Prime Minister of our country on many important projects concerning science, health, technology, as well as having an influence on how education is performed, science education is performed in the country. Isn't that interesting? He started by studying genes, like the CRISPR scientists we talked about. But then he moved into something that had, I would say, a broader impact, working in governance and policy, administration. That is something I would consider not so typical. In the similar category is Dr. Fabiola Gianotti, again, Italian name, Indian accent. I don't think I got that right. But she studied physics. She studied particle physics and eventually is the Director General of CERN. CERN is an organization which I'm sure everybody who likes science knows is where many of the most important discoveries about particle physics and experimental physics happen in the world. And CERN is, of course, in one country, but that doesn't mean CERN belongs to just that one country, because people come from all over the world to work at CERN, which means scientific knowledge belongs to everybody, belongs to all of humanity, which is why scientists often try to share whatever they understand, either by talking to journalists, by creating educational content on YouTube or on television, by advising the government, by advising institutions, and by simply having really interesting conversations with their friends and relatives and loved ones. A physicist, someone who's supposed to study particles, ends up running an entire institution that is focused on experimental physics. Isn't that interesting? Because when you're running an organization, you're not just doing physics. Of course, you have to think about the physics, but you also have to think about budgets. You have to think about salaries. You have to think about construction, timelines, laws, so many things. So here we once again we have somebody who has a grounding in science, a foundation in science, but is going beyond just that to contribute in an unusual way, and in this case, a larger way. Can you recognize these individuals? Maybe not, because they're not as famous in the news and in popular culture in India. On the top left is R.A. Mashalkar. He has a background and is most known for his work in chemistry. So he's a chemist. He's a chemistry scientist. But because he became so knowledgeable about things that go beyond chemistry, he actually helped the government come up with how to draft laws related to patents. What do patents have to do with chemistry? Right? Patents go well beyond chemistry. Patents concern all disciplines in sciences. On the bottom, we have Divya Karnad, who primarily studies marine biology, but she also works in conservation, conserving marine life. Lots of fishes, sharks, turtles, even animals that live on beaches and not just in water. She helps educate the rest of the country and young people like us on what marine biology is. How can you live a conscious life that doesn't harm marine life? On top of everything else, she also is a seafood entrepreneur. Yet another example of someone taking an offbeat path, but still not straying too far away from science, what we call science adjacent. And we have here Prashanjit Yadav, who studied molecular biology, but is now best known for his photography work, for his wildlife photography. Similarly, we have Raja Chaudhary, who has a foundation in architecture, but moved into making films and documentaries, some of which were actually about Indian scientists. So is this gentleman a filmmaker, or is he an architect? Is he a scientist? Or maybe he's a little bit of everything, and that's absolutely fine, as long as he's happy. There are many, many ways in which you can contribute to science without actually doing science or research. And what we have here are just some examples of some science adjacent paths. So to be a scientist or to be in science adjacent paths, you have to first understand what excites you. Are you the sort of person who likes to discover new things? Are you the sort of person who likes to build things that didn't exist before, but you're the one who's going to come in and build them from scratch and present it to the world? Are you the sort of person who likes to help people and heal them? Who likes to heal people, who likes to heal nature? Or are you the kind of person who is naturally happy protecting people, protecting nature? Finally, the category I belong to. Are you somebody who's so excited about science and who loves science so much that you can't stop talking about it? You want to explain science, you want to learn science first and then explain it to the people around you. So you can be a science writer, you can be a science journalist, you can work in a museum, you can work in a library, you can, again, have a YouTube channel, which is a very popular career option these days. But whatever you choose to do, it has to make you happy at your very core. It has to align with your passion. Finally, are you like somebody like Dr. Vijay Raghavan or the Director General of SUN, where you help institutions and governments decide what is right, what is wrong, what is allowed, what should never be allowed now or in the future? The examples we've considered so far Obviously, none of them are doing just one thing. Everybody is almost doing a little bit of all. Sometimes it's just two, sometimes it's only three of these things. But most skilled people do more than just one thing. For example, an educator or a teacher can protect and explain and also help decide at the same time. Now we're going to revisit some of the career, non-traditional science career paths or science adjacent roles we've talked about. A little game for you is to try to sort out which of these 5 verbs each career helps with. Someone could discover, someone could heal, someone could explain, someone could build, someone could protect, or someone could help societies and governments decide. Somebody who works in genetics but now advises the governments. Which of these do you think this person does? It doesn't have to be just one, it could be many. Somebody who studied zoology but now does illustrations. What do you think they do? Clearly they help explain, but do they also help protect because they're spreading awareness about conservation maybe? Somebody who studied molecular biology but now does wildlife photography. Again, what do you think? Which all of these 6 do you think they do? That's 6, not 5. My mistake. Anytime you encounter a person you admire and you want to understand more about their career, and that person happens to work in science, think about which of these 6 this person is doing. Maybe you'll come up with a 7th verb or a 7th role I haven't even thought of yet. Every time you come up with a career that interests you, you will find almost inevitably, it's never just one verb. It's never just one of these. It's always 2 or 3, always. Because human beings, all of us, have many, many paths to ourselves. We could choose to focus on one path, but that doesn't mean our other interests go away. We often find a way of bringing together our interests and creating a career that is perfect for us. It may not be perfect for somebody else. It may not be even respectable if you ask, your neighbor, for example. But does that matter? Does it matter as long as you're following your passion and doing good? Science is not one career. Science is an approach. It's a way of approaching a problem that interests you. Now, you can do that in a straightforward way by studying and collecting more and more degrees and becoming an expert in a particular scientific field. Or you can stay within an interest you already love, become an expert in that, and help advance science by using your expertise. Science goes so far beyond labs, and that's the most important thing to remember. Science goes beyond classrooms. Science goes beyond labs. Science is out there in the world. The entire planet has science all over it, and it's a pleasure to go out and explore and find out what excites you, what makes you happy, what makes you want to jump out of bed in the morning and get going. At the end of this discussion, at the end of this conversation, you don't need to decide exactly what you want to be. All you need to do is get a feel for what am I curious about, what am I excited about, and then follow that for a short period. See if you still enjoy it, see what aspects of it you like, what aspects you don't like at all, and then start over. Now that you've decided a special area that actually excites you and you like all of its aspects, explore that further. You can always return back all the way and start over. That's 100% allowed because life is very long and life is meant to explore, investigate, and be excited about whatever you're doing. And science is an amazing way of making sure that your curiosity is always alive and your brain is always fizzing around with many, many new ideas, and you will never feel bored. It doesn't matter how old you get, you will never, ever, ever get bored. Remember, I am 100% sure, without even us spending time together, I am 100% sure that you have multiple abilities. You have multiple talents. Maybe you're good in English and you can also sing. And you also find sports interesting. Now it's up to you to decide which of these interests you want to combine and which of these interests you want to do every day and make that into a career, right? Your interests can be as many different things as you like, and you will still find a way of doing as many of them as possible at the same time. That's what's beautiful about freeing yourself from thinking, I have to be a doctor, I have to be an engineer. And no. There are many things one can be. There are many ways one can be a part of society and better society and better your own mind. And it's up to you to understand yourself first and decide what are my interests. And the very first question we asked, what is a problem that you would like to be a part of solving? So, okay, you understand that science can have some traditional typical parts, some science can have some atypical parts. So what? That's true for every field. And you'd be absolutely right to think that. What does it mean for you? What are you going to do today after you walk away from this video or this recording? Think about what you like. Take a piece of paper or even talk to yourself aloud. I talk to myself aloud a lot, and I find it helpful. So you can write, you can talk to your friend, you can talk to yourself, you can talk to your pet. Think about what you like. Right? Start a sentence. I like, and let whatever comes out of you naturally come out. It could be animals, space, health, coding, drawing, solving mysteries, thinking and communicating. You like climate change. Well, not like it, but you enjoy learning about it. 2, start the next sentence. I am good at or want to improve at these things. I am good at asking questions. I am good at observing and noticing details that other people miss out. I am good at working with other people and making sure everybody works very well together and happily together as a team because I'm a natural leader, or I am very good at working with other people, which means I'm good at teamwork. I'm good at explaining. Maybe some of you liked the way I explained this, and maybe some of you hated it. If you disliked it, this is your chance to think about how would you do it better? How would you explain the same subject better than Upasana? And if you enjoyed that process, that means you're good at explaining and you would like to become better at explaining. Or you're good at maths. You're naturally drawn to maths, or you're naturally drawn to language or design and processes, which could be artistic, or it could be more like the engineering kind of processes. It could be organizational processes, because anything can be a process, can't it? The way you run ISRO or the way you run CERN follows a process. Maybe that's the large scale kind of process you're interested in. Or you're very good at being patient. If you're very good at being patient, maybe you'd be very good at hiding in forest and waiting for a beautiful animal to come across your way so you can take a picture. And that's how we get photos of rare animals and very important animals. There are many other ways of exercising patience. This wildlife photography is just one that comes to the top of my head because I have a background in ecology and everything else. Now, once you have these 2 sentences answered, I like something. I am good at, or I want to improve something. Then think about science or science adjacent paths. A science career I might explore is a field, and these are just some examples. Remember, the world of science is infinite. A field scientist, because maybe you enjoy animals, but you also enjoy climate, and you enjoy noticing things. You're very good at noticing things. You're also good at teamwork, because I shouldn't have, because when you're working out in the field, in a forest or a grassland or an ocean or a mountain, you're never alone. You're always working with a team, right? Because you need people to occupy different roles to make sure everybody's safe up there. Maybe like Rohan Chakravarti or Ho He Cham, or a little bit like myself, you want to be an artist or a science illustrator. Maybe you want to be an astronaut because you're very good with patience. You also have great perseverance. You have a mind for mathematics, and You're very, very good at noticing and remembering things. Plus, you like space and adventure. A forensic scientist, you like solving crimes. You like being quiet, noticing details. You like working mostly in a room, but you like solving problems that actually help people, that save lives. Then you might want to think about the problem that you want to solve in society, which is, who is this criminal? Where can I find them? What are the clues that can help me find this criminal? A policy advisor, you prefer big picture things. You're good with detail, but you also want to make a difference at a big level, right? So you have both the ability to look at little things and remember them, but at the same time, you have the natural ability to see how this little thing connects to the big picture, right? In which case, you might want to go into policy or governance or administration. These are all big words, but they all just mean you're helping organizations and countries and programs run. That's all that means. You want to be an engineer because you like design, you have an knack for mathematics, you're patient, you're very quick, you're creative. Engineers can be extremely creative. Maybe you like coding, in which case you're a software engineer, which means you would help build the tools that is making this video call possible, that is making YouTube possible. And because you made YouTube possible, you're able to make science channels on YouTube possible. Could that be considered science adjacent? I'll leave that for you to decide. Or you could go a more typical route where you are a doctor, but you're not just a doctor. You treat patients, yes, but at the same time, you also do research in a disease or a condition that interests you very much, right? That would mean, again, you have a lot of patients. You don't mind working alone. You don't mind working long hours. You don't mind waiting for years and years and years to be appreciated, because science research especially takes many years before you see a result. And that's okay. So someone has to have that kind of a mindset to be drawn to research. And now it's your job to try and complete these 3 sentences. You can take your time and you can leave comments here or in the chat. You can write to us. We will share our email address at the end. And if you want to talk about any of this with me, you want help completing these sentences, you're absolutely free to ask me anything you want. But if you're wondering, what do I do at the end of this video call? These 3 sentences, that's what you do. Now, how do we know you learned anything? This is more of a prompt for your teachers to ask you, or for you to ask yourself or ask each other. I used to think science careers were dash. After this conversation we had together with Upasana, now I realize science careers can also be dash. For me, the answer when I was young was, I used to think science careers were nerdy and boring. Now I realize they can also be fun and exciting and combine my natural passions and interests. I didn't know that when I was young. Remember, the world is huge, and the number of things you can do that can make you happy, keep you fulfilled, also give you a reasonable amount of money to live and survive, help you take care of your loved ones, is also infinite. There are many, many things out there, but you will find them only if you have a mind that enjoys exploring. So when you browse the internet next, or when you read the news, when you read books, when you are forwarding Instagram reels to each other, think about the person who either made that content or the person being featured in the content, and think about, of the 6 categories, of the 6 verbs we use, right, including build, heal, explore, what would I assign to this person? What categories does this person fall under? Do I like those categories? What are my interests? I am good at, maybe a career for me could be. That's all I hope you take away from this wonderful conversation we've had today. Thank you so much for listening and allowing me to tell you what I like about science. And like I said, I'm a science writer. I write articles, I write books. There are many ways of being a science writer. But if there's any questions you want me to answer about science writing or about anything we just discussed, just write to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Upasana. And let's open the house for questions. So you can either like unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can just like drop in a chat box, or even on YouTube, you can just ask questions. Let me just check. Oh, we got a few questions actually. How important is storytelling in explaining science to society? And this question is asked from Himalayan Model Senior Secondary School, Kullu.
Thank you so much for that question. It's absolutely important because you don't want just to take a fact and throw it in somebody's face. They're not going to listen because it's not interesting. What you want is to be able to catch their attention, make them sit down and listen to you for a few minutes, and then when the conversation is over, you want them to retain that what the knowledge you discussed, right? You want them to remember everything you told them. And the best way to teach somebody something or explain something to somebody is via a story. That story could be a movie. Interstellar is a sci-fi film that taught a lot of us what it's like to be in space, the kind of challenges somebody in space would face. Was that the intention of Christopher Nolan? I don't know, but he told a story and I ended up learning a lot about science, didn't I? So being able to tell a story, have a character who is the main focus, have this character go through certain things. In the end, the character learns something. That's the essence of a story. The character can be a human, an animal, a tree, a concept, anything you want. But it's extremely important. And how do you get better at telling stories? Surely by practice. And by reading stories and thinking about, okay, I like this about this story, but I don't like this about this story. Here's how I would write it differently. And then actually going ahead and writing that story yourself in the way that you would, right? And read your own story. Think about, actually, no, this is not convincing, or this is not entertaining enough, or I wanted this part to be a joke, but it's just not funny. What do I do? Leave it aside for some time, come back to it, and improve. This is what they call the craft of storytelling. You spend time on it and you get better at it over a period of time. It's not going to happen in 1 day or 2 days. It could take months, it could take years. But the important thing is to always notice around you who's telling a story, how they're telling it, did they write it, are they speaking it, did they draw it, what is the plot of that story, how would I do it better, or what can I learn from that? So great question. And storytelling is absolutely essential to communication in any form, any medium.
Thank you. We have another question from Sonakshi. What challenges do science communicators face today because of misinformation on social media?
It's a huge problem. Again, a wonderful question. It's a huge problem because it's very easy to get misinformation than it is to get correct information. Because just by spending time on Instagram or Reddit, I spend a lot of time on Reddit. I'm an old Reddit person. Just by spending time on social media, you are being surrounded by opinions of all kinds. And sometimes you forget that those are just opinions because the people speaking sound so convinced of what they're saying. It sounds like facts because they have so much conviction about what they're saying, but it's not facts. So for a science communicator, not only do you have to present the facts, but first you have to go in and correct all of the wrong impressions somebody has. You have to go wipe the blackboard clean really, really well so there's no traces of the bad information. Then you have to put in the correct information. And that's a very, very hard thing to do, which is why when in science communication or science writing, you don't try to talk to the entire world. You try to talk to a specific audience. That's how you're able to decide what this audience needs and what I want to say to this audience. Move on to the next audience, and then the next, and then the next. Don't try to reach the entire world at once or correct the entire world at once because everybody's coming in with their own kind of misinformation. Thank you again for that wonderful question.
And now we have a question from Mansirat. What career opportunities are available for students in science communication apart from research and teaching?
Beautiful question. Like we talked about, a lot of research institutions are a great place to get science adjacent careers, including science communication. Many research universities, including your IITs, your ISC, every university has one little department, and all that department does is tell the rest of the world what kind of research happened in the university, right? Which means If you are an employee of this university and you're a very good science communicator, that's the department you should try and work in. It'll be called the press cell. It'll be called the communications department. It'll be called PR sometimes, public relations. But those are ways in which you can use your gifts for communication to talk about the research that happened in your own university, or to educate the public about a huge issue happening right now. Right, there could be a pandemic, a new pandemic, like people are talking about the hunter virus. Maybe you can be the person to represent the university and say, listen, it's not that big a problem, calm down. Or you can educate people about what to do with trash in a country like India, where it's very difficult to manage trash. You can talk about global warming. So what kind of career opportunities exist? Many, many, many. It will not be inside a lab necessarily, but it will be outside the lab to help the world understand what is happening inside the lab. You could also be the person who who writes or talks to donors and helps people give money to fund research projects. Because the donor has a lot of money, but they may not have a lot of knowledge about the research going on. You could be the one to convince them, hey, we're doing this really important research project, but we're short on some cash. Could you please assist this researcher with their research project? Here's why you should. Here are the benefits of it. Here's how you could be helping society. So now it's your job to convince the donor or the funder why they should help your university or your friends or one particular researcher who's in need or lab that's in need. So that in grant making, fundraising, PR and communications, the news department, the press and news media department, those are some great opportunities you have within research institutions itself.
Thank you. We have a question from Divyansh. How do you make difficult science topic easy and interesting for common people?
Well, it has to be clear in your head first. Why is a topic considered difficult? Because you don't understand it, or because it has many big words? If you don't understand it, take your time and study that topic until it's very, very clear in your head. Once it's clear in your head, all you're going to do is say everything that's in your head in simple words to somebody else. Is a science topic complex because it has many technical words? That's most often the case. Then you have to find, for one technical word, what is one sentence I can use to explain what that means, right? One technical word often needs many, many simple words to explain it. So you're going to do this process of translating technical terms, complicated terms, scientific terms into everyday language. That's going to increase the number of words you use, but that's fine because it means you're able to communicate with the ordinary person. So instead of say astrophysics, you will say space science. That's fine. Or instead of saying solar research, you're going to say studying about the sun, right? Like so-and-so is a person who studies the sun, or who studies why the sun is this color, right? As an example. Instead of saying so-and-so is a solar scientist specializing in blah, 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 and sunspots and this and that. So the first thing to do is ask yourself, do I understand everything here? Unless you do that, unless you educate yourself about it, that's where the science bit of it comes in, right? Unless it's so clear in your head, you have no doubts at all, then it'll come naturally to you if you're a communicator to explain in simple words to somebody else. Sometimes you need help to understand the subject. That's when you can reach out to a scientist. You can say, hey, Professor so-and-so, I didn't understand this. Can you please help me understand? If they're free, they will help you. If they're not, if they don't have time, write to somebody else. There's no dearth of scientists in the country who would be more than happy to explain to you what these terms mean. So yeah, I hope that answers your wonderful question.
Thank you, ma'am. And I have a question from Daksh. What are the biggest misconceptions people usually have about science?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that it's done by one person. It's never done by one person sitting in a lab in a corner. It's done by teams, always. Even if one person wins an award for the science, they didn't do it alone. A team did it together, right? There'll be an instructor, there'll be someone very senior, there'll be students, there'll be lab assistants, administrators, and like we discussed, accountants. That's an entire team that made that research possible. It's never just one person. So when we think about this scientist is the greatest scientist we ever had, that's true. They are the greatest mind we ever had. But that science would not have reached us. It would not have become possible without the team behind that person. Right? Always, always remember, science is not about one hero or one brilliant genius. It's always teams. It's always cooperation and teamwork. And that's something I'm passionate about conveying to people. So that's my answer for you. Thank you for that question.
And I guess we have our last question from Shruti. Which project or article are you most proud of in your career?
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Shruti. Okay, so there is this one article I wrote. It's called I Fell in Love with a Dead Wasp. You can Google it. If you Google my name, it should probably come up. And it's more of a personal essay on my relationship with the subject of insects and wasps and how that changed over time when I met a scientist who studied wasps. So for me, at the beginning, wasps and bees and these creatures were like these yucky, dangerous creatures that I don't want to touch. They probably sting you and they hurt. They're not your friends, you know. They're not like puppies. But over time, I actually ended up meeting a researcher, a scientist, who exclusively studies wasps. And because of that person, I was able to see wasps in a whole new perspective. And that's what this little essay is about. It's called I Fell in Love with a Dead Wasp. And it's very personal to me, which is why I'm quite proud to share it with you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And now I would like to hand over this session to Anuradha, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Shivangi. Upasana, can I request you to stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
Thank you for the wonderful, wonderful session. And before you go, I just have to ask you this, from your book, Unruly, on the Ig Nobel Awards, you've written about E. coli and how you can share, store a movie or a video in a bacteria. I mean, I can't let you go before you tell us how that's done. I'm sure the students would also love to hear about it.
So, remember we talked about this one doctor who won a Nobel Prize for discovering a technology called CRISPR. It was a way of editing the genes in the body, just as you can edit a sentence in Microsoft Word or Google Docs by inserting letters wherever you want, inserting words and sentences wherever you want, removing what you don't want. This CRISPR is a way of altering the genes, which also are made of tiny letters, by the way, in a way, by inserting what you want, removing what you don't want, etc. That's why it's so important, because you can cure so many genetic diseases if you're able to remove the error in the gene that's causing the disease. Now, there's a team that used this CRISPR technology to not just insert sentences or words or correct errors. They inserted an entire video clip inside the DNA of bacteria. And it's absolutely insane that someone would even think about doing that. Because imagine, why would a respectable scientist go about their day and suddenly decide, maybe today I'm going to save a movie in bacteria, right? But they had a very, very special process. How do you, because a bacterium is not like a hard drive that you can just plug something into. First of all, it's really, really tiny. How would a movie even fit inside? They had a very unique approach. What they did was they realized a movie, a video clip, is just a bunch of still photographs that are moving very rapidly after another. It gives our brain the illusion of movement. So they realized, okay, we're going to separate the movie into all the still photographs that are the frames of the movie. Then we're going to separate each frame, which is a still photograph, into its pixels and dots. Because a photo is nothing but a groups of pixels, little dots in columns, right, very close to each other, and each dot is a particular color. And because the color changes so precisely, we're able to see a shape or a picture in that still photograph, right? So they took the video and turned it into still photographs into pixels, into pixel positions and pixel color. that information is what they turned into genetic information. That is, when genes are made of letters, they decided that I'm going to use this letter to indicate a pixel of this position, and this letter to indicate that a pixel of this position has this color. So basically, they turned everything that makes up a movie into the letters that make up genes. And that was a huge number of letters. They inserted that into the bacteria's DNA using CRISPR technology. And then it's not enough to insert something. You also want to be able to retrieve it in a proper way, because the point of a video clip is to watch it, not just keep it safe somewhere forever. You want to be able to remove this video clip back and play it on a screen to prove that your approach is actually proper, your methodology is perfect. They to prove that, they did the reverse. They took the entire letters that correspond to the movie. They did the exact reverse process of what they did before. The letters became the pixel positions and pixel colors. The pixel positions and pixel colors, when tightened, it became a still photograph. Still photographs placed in a certain order become the movie. So that's your video clip at the end. So it's not that they plugged in a USB power cord and copy and pasted the movie file. They converted movie, which is also data in a way, right? It's just digital data, right? They converted that into a form of data that a bacterium's DNA can accept. Then they reversed the process just to prove that it's possible. They took the data inside the bacteria and brought it back into the digital form that we call a movie. And they did it with a short clip of a horse galloping. And it's hilarious, it's beautiful, it's weird, and it's also fun. More importantly, it's incredibly useful and exciting. So that's something I've written about in my book called Unruly. Now, this book, you may enjoy it, you may not enjoy it. It's better for older students. So check with your parents and teachers if you're allowed to read it. But otherwise, have fun with it.
Absolutely. It's weird and it's wonderful. And it just shows us that science can be so much fun. Another thing I found in your book, why woodpeckers don't get headaches even though they're banging their heads against a tree the entire day. Right? Yeah. Because
that's another question. That's another interesting question a scientist can ask and has asked, because there's these two scientists. They looked at a woodpecker, and a woodpecker pecking away at very hard bark of a tree 12,000 times a day, and yet has no headaches, has no concussions, no injuries, is not dizzy. Because if we tried to bang our head on the wall, we would become injured, ill, we might even die, we would break our necks. But woodpeckers don't. So what's so special about them, these tiny birds, that they have no injuries whatsoever, despite pecking away at hard trees all day long? And so they looked at the skull of the woodpecker and found that the anatomy of the skull is such that it's able to absorb shocks. And using that information, they're able to actually help us humans design better helmets to protect our heads and our skulls, which are not as strong as a woodpecker's. So yeah, there's no end to the kind of weird and insane questions you can ask and try to solve using just science.
Yeah, and it just proves what you said, you find a problem to solve. So somebody looked at a woodpecker and wondered, how come they don't get headaches? And then went about answering that question. So,
exactly.
Yeah. That's how wonderful it is. Thank you, Upasana, for opening up our minds to something like this. How wonderful, weird, and exciting the world of science can be. And it's not just traditional careers, there's so much more. I mean, the sky is the limit, and basically it's whatever you imagine, right? There's no limit to it. Thanks so much.
Exactly.
And for the teachers, students, everybody listening in, Upasana has generously agreed to answer any more questions, So please write to us and at edskExpress. And, we will forward all those questions to Upasana, and you can, stay in touch beyond this session with her. Thank you again, Upasana. Thank you, Shivangi, for moderating. And thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.